worthy.
From the Sunshine State, this is Tampa Bay's Tan Talk.
It's time for FLA Law, brought to you by the personal injury attorneys of Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes. This hour will be informative, along with taking your questions and comments. Now, here are your hosts for today's show.
That's right. This is FLA Law live on the radio. And as you know, this is your live legal call-in talk show. And we come to you live every Tuesday at 5 o'clock to answer your legal questions live on the air. Thank you for joining us tonight. As you know, and as the intro states, we are the personal injury lawyers at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes, who host FLA Law on the radio every Tuesday. And we specialize in personal injury and auto accidents. And our firm has been around since 1955. And today, myself, Jacqueline Bryant, and my colleague, Lori Robinson, are here to answer your legal questions live on the air as we do every single Tuesday. With that being said, the show goes very well if we have lots of callers calling in and asking legal questions. And it, of course, the information that you ask could be a benefit to someone else who's listening. So if you have a legal question and you'd like to get it in on the show tonight, this would be a great time to do so. We're here for the next hour, answering your legal questions live on the air. And before Lori and I jump into our legal discussions and going over various topics tonight, I want to make sure you all have the best ways to tune in and watch us, depending on where you are. Everybody kind of has different schedules, but if we say, hey, if you're on the way home, you should hopefully be listening us in your car on the radio. But if not, let's say you're still at work or you work from home and you want to tune in online, then that's great because we have other ways that you can listen. We are on the Facebook live stream right now. So if you're following our law firm Facebook page, and you should see that we're streaming live at this very moment. I'm actually going to share the broadcast on my personal page just so that everybody can find it if you're friends with me. But if not, the law firm's name is Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes Injury Lawyers. So if you put that in your search bar, you should see like a red circle that says we're live right around our logo. If you click on that, then you'll be able to see Lori and I. We're right here in the station. And of course, you'll be able to tune into the show. And the beauty of that is you can actually drop your legal questions and comments right there in the Facebook live chat. That way, if you're a little shy and don't want to have your voice on the radio, you don't have to. You can just drop your legal question right there in the comment section, and I will read them out over the air, and Lori and I will address them and answer those questions or comments for you. But it doesn't always have to be a question, right, Lori? It can be a comment. Maybe if you just want to chime in on the conversation or second something that we've said or give another perspective to whatever the conversation is. You can absolutely do that as well. We'd like to have you involved in the conversation. But if you don't have Facebook and you're not able to sit in your car and listen to the radio, then you can certainly also watch us on YouTube right now. We are streaming live on YouTube as well. And of course, it's the same name, Perenich, Caulfield, Avril Noyes Injury Lawyers. Perenich is spelled Perenich. That is how you should search us on YouTube as well. You'll see our live stream on that account, and you'll be able to ask questions there also. With that being said, we definitely want to hear from you by phone. So the phone number is 727-441-3000. Again, to call in with your legal questions, the number is 727-441-3000. The lines are open. Feel free to go ahead and get your calls in. We prefer to have them early on in the show. That way, at the end, we're not trying to rush through your questions. We can give you ample time and discussion on the topics, because once we get later on the show, we may not be able to spend as much time on it, right?
Just true.
So you want to get your calls in early. The lines are open, 441-3000. with that being said, of course, as I mentioned, we're personal injury lawyers, so you can expect some of our conversations are going to, obviously surround those topics and focus in on the personal injury realm. And what we've done frequently, and I enjoy doing with Lori, is talking about some current events and different things that have happened here lately in the news in our immediate area or even across other parts of the state of Florida. Sometimes we venture outside the state of Florida if there's a very, big current event or some news topic that is nationally televised, then we may discuss those. But I've got a few great articles tonight that we can kind of touch on and kind of see what the legal implications might be on these various topics. And then, of course, we'll go over some of our very tried and true auto accident and auto injury related type frequently asked questions that we think are always very important for our listeners to know, understand, and be aware of as they kind of go throughout their day to day. Because as you know, in Tampa Bay area and in the state of Florida, auto accidents are common. I mean, I'm sure you see them on your way to work, on your way home, and so that is something that you just want to be informed about and understand the law when it comes to these topics, right? So with that being said, I have an article that I'd like to jump right into. But before I do that, I want to, of course, remind our listeners of who my special guest is tonight. Lori Robinson, you've heard from many, many times, but of course, I'll give her a chance to just say hello and remind everyone who she is.
Yes, I'm always very happy to come on the air with you, Jacqueline. And, it's just really, I think it's a great thing that the firm has carried on for so many years. Many years ago, of course, we were on the television, and now to get back with FLA Law on the radio and talk to people a little bit about important issues that pertain to personal injury.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's a wonderful thing. And I actually talked briefly over the weekend on one of the sports shows that comes on the air here at the station. And I think it's like a 2-hour sports show. And I'm not a very big sports person, but he allowed us to come in and talk about the firm. And it was just something that he talked about was just general, like what do you do after a car accident? And I think that's just important information for anybody, especially when you're in crowded circumstances, like going to ball games and you're in the traffic and you're on the highways and you're trying to get into the parking lots or the parking garages, which can be a nightmare in and of themselves. Guess what? Car accidents can happen. And so I think it applies to all platforms, all listeners, all walks of life. You all need this. You all, can benefit from the information because, want it or not, you're likely to encounter those problems.
Right. Or somebody in your family or a friend. So it's just it's a area of kind of sort of fundamental knowledge. It's good just to have a little idea.
It's good to know. And then you'd be surprised of a lot of misinformation that's out there.
Sure,
as well.
Absolutely. Oh yes. Now being a lawyer all these years, and I know you'd have the same situation. And someone will be telling you about how things really go, and it's like, okay.
And if we have time, we're gonna talk about something that I recently saw online the other day, and the person was like, well. Someone had gotten hit by an individual who sadly left the scene and pulled away. They kind of pretended like they were going to pull over, and then they kept going. And so this was all recorded by someone on social media. And everybody was in the comments were like, aren't you in Florida? I think you'll be fine. Florida's a no-fault state. And I'm like, not so much, not in the way that you think here. So yes, in the sense that there's certain coverages that she'll have on her own policy, but if she's injured and things of that nature, Florida's no-fault law has nothing to do with that. So we'll get into that discussion and see, because that's, I think, again, misinformation. People just assume, well, it's a no-fault state. It doesn't matter if the person takes off, they hit you. Well, that's not quite true. Yeah. So anyway, but let's talk about some of these current events first. And then if we have time, we'll obviously talk on more about Florida's no-fault law and uninsured motorist coverage and some of those popular topics. But first and foremost is a sad story I wanted to talk about out of Sarasota County, which of course isn't very far from us, about a school bus driver. And there's not a ton of details, but we do have enough to kind of piece together what happened. So Not too long ago, a Sarasota County school bus driver was unfortunately killed in a 4-car crash, looks like just last week, after experiencing what they said was a medical event. So unfortunately, because the driver experienced a medical event, it caused him to lose control of the school bus. And because of this medical event, which they say repeatedly in this article that it was a medical event, the driver ended up leaving the roadway, traveled onto the grassy shoulder, entering to the parking lot of a public supermarket, and then collided with 2 SUVs, an unoccupied pickup truck, and then kind of just made his final stop somewhere in the Publix parking lot. Sadly, that driver did pass away and was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. And it just basically says that there's, kind of an ongoing investigation, and they're, of course, providing support and counseling to the school district community. But that's about it. And so they've kind of ruled it as a medical episode. And so my question to you, Lori, is what happens in circumstances like this where there's obviously severe accident, multiple cars involved, potentially multiple injuries, and then you have this bus driver for the county who had a medical event.
Right.
And
so
how does that come into play?
So in all situations involving responsibility for an automobile accident, or really any accident, there has to be what we call negligence. There has to have been a failure to act reasonably as a reasonable person would act.
Sure.
So if you have a medical event that is completely unanticipated and you couldn't have known about it, unlike and so as lawyers we know that, of course, investigations, and there can be arguments made based on what those investigations turn up. So suppose you had a situation where an otherwise seemingly healthy individual just all of a sudden had a heart attack, something, and no ongoing heart issues that weren't being treated or something of that nature, then in that scenario there really wouldn't be any negligence. And so the tragedy of the loss of the life of the bus driver, of course, very awful, but other people that happen to have been injured in that particular scenario, if those are the facts, would not have a claim against the bus driver, the city or the county, because there was no negligence. Now, having practiced law for many, many, many years, and the longer you do this, the more you realize, well, it kind of depends. Because in most situations,
the default lawyer answer.
It depends. Because in most situations, it's probably going to be a little bit more complex than that, because if it was truly like I can think of some friends that just had an epileptic seizure out of the blue.
That was one word that I wrote down.
And that is something that can occur, without any real forewarning. But more often, what I've seen over the years would be something where a person does have an underlying medical condition, and perhaps really shouldn't be driving, or should be, exercising more care, and in that scenario, and that's what the investigation would be about by the police, but also ultimately by the injured parties, who presumably would go to attorneys to seek counsel. And if they came to our firm, we would be looking to investigate to see what we could find out about the actual full set of circumstances.
And I think that's the important issue that would obviously come into the investigation is what was known in terms of the health of the driver. And I don't know very much about whether there's physicals, but I would imagine there's some sort of requirement when you're applying to become a school bus driver. At least vision, I would imagine, is number one. Now, as far as there's other medical physicals, I don't know. But that would be, to me, the main issue is trying to understand whether this person had some sort of medical history that would have been known to him or his employer, which would have been the school board. And if that's the case, then maybe it's not as dire as it might seem. But I would suspect initially this would be a complete denial by the
Oh
school
yeah, I
board.
think, and honestly, that I think you think about the types of medical concerns a person can have that could, like epilepsy. So say you're, far as you know, your seizures are controlled. You're taking medication.
Right.
You don't really have but you might occasionally have a breakthrough seizure, but it's not something that happens at all predictably or often. So there can be a lot of questions, because there are situations where, if you've been seizure free for like 6 months, then, I think pretty much you can drive if your doctor thinks it's all right.
Right. If you have the medical clearance.
Yeah. So, and yet, we could say as lawyers, we're always, we kind of play devil's advocate, so to speak, to use that kind of phrase, looking to see, really balancing those things out, because there can be conditions that and it would be hard to actually learn. You'd have to get enough information, and it might even require some being actually in a lawsuit where you'd have subpoena power.
You have to get those records and such. Yeah.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, there are certain records you can get in a school board type of a case as public record, but it wouldn't necessarily entail the driver's medical information and those sorts of things.
Right.
So that is something you wouldn't be entitled to as a result of public record. So like you said, this may be something that if it were to be pursued, it would likely have to go into litigation. With that being said, of course, it's quite unfortunate.
All around, absolutely.
Anytime there is a school board or government entity, you're also looking at caps on the damages, and in terms of what you can pursue, which is $200,000 per per person and $300,000 per occurrence, which means if there's multiple injured parties, which it sounds like there were several vehicles that were hit, one of which was fortunately unoccupied, but those damages then have to be divided amongst all, the individuals that were injured, which again is another unfortunate hurdle, which 200, of course, is better than 10,000.
Yes, but it's still depending on the circumstances. If there really are quite a number of injured parties,
correct.
It may not be quite a bit to go around, so to speak.
Right, exactly right. So, of course, when you find yourself in situations like this, and you are involved in an incident where there may have been a suspected medical episode, it's always best to get a consultation with a personal injury attorney, to give us a call so that we can kind of go over those facts and determine the best method of investigating and whether there's kind of more to the full picture of the story.
Right. And this is one of those things, where particularly when there's a tragedy like this, and actually, anytime there's an accident to one degree or another, obviously there's a tragedy.
It's unfortunate.
And we sort of live in that world. And so our focus is trying to more or less help the individuals that have been injured and kind of ameliorate the sense of the tragedy by finding a path to legitimately get compensation for their injuries.
Right.
But it doesn't mean, obviously the whole situation is unfortunate, and it's not that, probably the bus driver or anybody in these situations, they don't mean to cause an accident. And a lot of times I think people will sort of just take things as they're given. And so, but in a situation like this, it's a more complicated factual situation. It would be very, very helpful to an individual actually to review this with an attorney, because otherwise you're not going to have any idea actually.
And that's right. And I'm not even sure as to the circumstances as to how the driver was hired, and not to suggest that there were these particular issues with this particular school bus or this particular school district. But I do know here in recent years, they've been having a lot of trouble staffing the school bus system and finding drivers. And, you never know if there's that at play as far as kind of a little bit of a desperation and a push to fill, or maybe just for whatever reason,
just not really being that discriminating in who they select.
Exactly my point.
Or not checking.
Yeah.
So it's not to, and again, like you said, we're using this scenario to kind of talk about issues that can come up with these types of issues. But I think that is something that would bear looking into in any setting. But, as I say, it doesn't necessarily mean it might be. There are instances when we review cases and have to say, I'm sorry, but, we're not able to help you because
there's no negligence.
Yeah, there's no negligence that we're going to be able to show here. And obviously the common situation we deal with all the time is that there is an insurance coverage that would be applicable here. That would be the limitations you spoke of. But so.
And the reason why I brought up that point is I actually had a recent case against a school board in the state of Florida. And when I looked up the driver's driving record, I was actually quite appalled.
It's like, wait a minute.
Wow. This school board is entrusting students and minor children into the care and safety of a driver with this kind of traffic record. And it was quite shocking. So just
illustrates the point. It's really worthwhile to check into things. Don't make assumptions.
Right. So.
Especially don't make assumptions that, pardon me for saying it, but that the government is doing what it should be doing.
Absolutely right. And so again, the default would be, of course, to consult with an attorney. So that was unfortunately a sad story, but I think it was a good topic to kind of get into. And of course, we see those kinds of things often, unfortunately.
Including being in a parking lot where you would never think that you're going to be subject to an accident. And then something wild happens, which is actually not as infrequent as people would think.
Right. Absolutely right. Especially when you have businesses or restaurants and things where I think we talked about on the show once where people are now dining kind of close to the curb. There's outdoor seating. That's kind of a feature in the state of Florida.
Sure.
The indoor-outdoor feature. People like to dine on the patio, and those patios are often close to the road or in the parking lot where there's traffic. And so the fact that these kinds of accidents can occur where you're simply sitting there or you're in your vehicle or you're walking, but you're so close to traffic and the roadway that, it's unfortunately not as uncommon as you might expect.
Right.
Yeah. So that being said, we have another, I feel like it's sad because most of the stories that I bring, there's always a death involved, which is horrible. But it makes you appreciate life. That's for sure.
Yes.
But here's another one. So this one is based out of Palm Beach. And I'm going to go over this one before we take our break, but it was involving the new Brightline train. So I don't know if you've heard about the Brightline. But it's ironic that I found this story and I thought we'd talk about it. We don't have very much facts or details about it. But the reason why I wanted to bring it up is because it's new. I believe we're just at like the 1-year anniversary of the Brightline. I remember seeing kind of their inaugural ribbon cutting ceremony in Orlando, and they were breaking the bottles of champagne. It was taking its first voyage down to Miami. I think that's basically where it goes from Orlando to Miami. And it's the speed train. And I was literally just talking to a friend about it over the weekend because we were talking about the time it takes to get from Orlando to Miami is roughly about the same amount of time it takes if you were just driving in your car. So I was like, oh, okay, is it really a speed train? But then, of course, she pointed out, well, they've got multiple stops. So they stop, I think, in West Palm Beach, which is where this incident occurred. I think they stop in Boca, and then maybe 1 or 2 stops within Miami, in the Miami area. With that being said, of course, there's the benefit of you not having to drive. You don't have to deal with traffic. There's beverage and food and all those kinds of comforts and things on there, so that it makes it some sort of an alternative to driving. So, and I was actually like, oh, that might be a good idea just to try it out.
Just check it out, the little event.
See how it is. And then, of course, I see this and I thought, well, that's not good for the first year in business. But this is a West Palm Beach story where, unfortunately, Palm Beach Gardens police are investigating a fatal crash involving the Brightline train, in which a vehicle apparently it collided with a vehicle at Burns Road and alternate A1A down in West Palm Beach. And all they really know is that there was one sole occupant in the vehicle, and it was a male. And unfortunately, he was pronounced dead. They closed the train tracks and the road at that area, and it's still being investigated by Brightline and also the Palm Beach Gardens police. And at this time, there's really nothing that they have released other than that it's an ongoing investigation. So to me, there's so many questions there about how this happened, and we don't really know a whole lot about it. But to me, it's interesting that this brand new speed train has now already been involved with an incident. And so it makes me think, how did this car end up on the train tracks?
Right.
And is there any potential liability here? If I know some personal injury attorneys, they specialize in train injuries. These are usually very catastrophic, as you see this person did pass away. And so me having never done this, and I don't know if you've ever had anything similar, but it's like, well, what are we looking at here? What should we be looking for? Is it a signage issue? Is a lighting issue? How does a person kind of end up on the tracks?
You'd
what
have
do you
to
think about
assume that because unfortunately, they didn't give us any detail
None
there
at
to
all.
know, except you figure, how does that occur? And so it does make you wonder, would it have been something where, I see occasionally, like, when we come down Belcher to our office, there was, we have railroad tracks. I never really see anything happening there, but that bar that will sometimes go up and down, but there doesn't appear to be anything going on.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that's about,
Yeah.
But because I don't want to get hit by a train,
You always stop.
you're
right?
looking, it's like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
So here, I can't imagine, we just don't know. So if the driver was completely inattentive, but, a train is kind of an obvious thing.
Yeah, you would think it's making noise and sound and so forth and so on. So it's interesting to try to figure out whether there'll be any kind of fault on Brightline. And I don't know if the Brightlines is even the one that's responsible for, the tracks being visible or the signage being appropriate or the arm coming down, as you say.
Something like that. Maybe there was a malfunction of some kind or something that was confusing.
Sure.
Making those assumptions, then, because obviously the train, they do have to look out. But if everything was operating as it should, but it's hard to see if that's happening. How on earth does somebody end up being able to get onto the track?
Right.
Like that?
Absolutely. And I imagine any train, and this is actually advertised as a speed train, but I would say any train is going to be traveling at a very high rate of speed.
Right.
And so how the person was able to get onto the tracks or somehow come into contact is quite interesting. Now, I've seen situations where individuals, they may have thought they were all the way off the track and somehow something they were carrying or a trailer or the flatbed or something somehow gets clipped and then it causes such a catastrophic accident. But they were kind of already off, but didn't realize a part of their vehicle was still on. So I've seen things like that.
Right.
This is quite interesting.
Well, this piques the interest.
That's for sure. I guess you just never really know until the investigation comes out. So, of course, I'll be keeping an eye on that. And if I hear more or see more facts,
I think that could be a follow-up because I think it's without knowing, the kind of things that happen are things like you were discussing, really. So there could have been some malfunction or something, and it's hard to imagine how a vehicle gets on the track without that.
Right.
Now, if it had been a person, sometimes you have situations where people are, the pedestrians or whatever get on the track. That you could see a little more where maybe somebody could make a mistake that the train couldn't really perceive in time to avoid. But a vehicle on the track, maybe it was a situation where a vehicle stopped.
It was 2:15 in the afternoon. So lighting shouldn't have been a factor. As I'm looking at it, it says it was 2:15 p.m. So interesting.
Right. And I'd say, it just makes me think that one of the things I think is always important for people to reflect on a little bit is that in our society today, there's been a lot of commentary about litigiousness and lawyers doing this, that, or the other. And the truth of the matter is that when you have things that can be very injurious to people, obviously trains, vehicles, et cetera, it really does help overall for accountability, basically.
Absolutely.
And so if there is something that happened that could have been better signage or whatever it is, the investigation of this incident will hopefully help that so that you prevent
and
something occurring in the future.
Run. Yeah, exactly. And that's ultimately the goal and what you would hope to occur, to come out of these kinds of instances, that it's going to be improved so that these things should not occur in the future, and that it wasn't for naught, if you will. But this is a good time to take a short break. Of course, the lines are open, folks. We are here to answer your legal questions live on the air. This is FLA Law, live on the radio, and the call-in number is 727-441-3000. We are going to take a short commercial break. And when we come back, of course, we'll continue to talk a little bit more about the personal injury topics, and we have another current event that we'll also discuss. But call in with your legal question. The lines are open, 727-441-3000, and we will take a short break and be right back with myself and Lori Robinson.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
In 1955, the law firm now known as Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes made a decision. Instead of taking whatever cases came through their doors, they decided to focus specifically on personal injury. 64 years later, the law firm is one of Clearwater's longest-running personal injury firms. Available 24 hours a day with offices in Clearwater and throughout Tampa Bay, they're ready to put decades of experience to work for you if you or a loved one has been injured in a car accident or injured due to someone's negligence or recklessness. If you feel overwhelmed, uncertain, or unsure about your next steps after being involved in an accident or after a loved one sustained serious injuries due to someone else's negligence, call Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes at 727-796-8282 or online at usalaw.com. That's 727-796-8282 or online at usalaw.com. Non-attorney spokesman.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
And we are back. This is FLA Law live on the radio. Hopefully you've been tuning in since 5. We are here till 6 o'clock answering your legal questions live on the air. I'm here, Jacqueline Bryan, with my colleague and co-host, Lori Robinson. As you may know, we are the personal injury attorneys at Perenich, Caulfield, Avril, and Noyes, and we have been discussing some legal topics as a result of some car accidents that have been in the news recently. And of course, we'll get into other personal injury topics as we go throughout the show. But of course, if you have legal questions, now's the perfect time to call. The lines are open. It is 727-441-3000. And of course, you can continue to stream. It looks like we have a few viewers on Facebook. Feel free to share, like, comment. If you have a question or a comment, feel free to do that in the chat. If you're watching on YouTube, do the same, share, like, comment, and you never know, your family members or friends may have legal questions and may not know about the show, and you could be helping them out, allowing them to get their question answered on the air. With that being said, we've talked about a couple different car accidents that we've heard about in the news that were somewhat tragic, unfortunately, involving a school bus driver in Sarasota, and then, of course, the Bright Line train accident down in West Palm Beach, which resulted in someone's death. But here's another one, another sad story that unfortunately involved another death. And this was in Lake County. And it's a bit bizarre because of how it all got set in motion. So I want to read the story to you, and then we can kind of break it down to determine if there's, a way forward for the injured party or the unfortunate, the person that passed away. With that being said, this was a man who unfortunately was killed, and I believe the passenger was injured in a car crash after a tree fell on their pickup truck.
Oh, wow.
The tree falling on the pickup truck then caused them to collide with a dump truck, according to the Florida Highway Patrol. So this is about 4:25 in the afternoon last Tuesday. when a 58-year-old driver who was from Groveland was driving his pickup truck when a tree fell into the vehicle. Now, where the tree came from, we don't know, but it fell into the car, which caused him to apparently lose control. He went into the eastbound lanes in the path of an oncoming dump truck. So because of this, unfortunately, the 58-year-old driver and his 40-year-old passenger were airlifted and taken to the nearby hospital. Unfortunately, the driver was pronounced dead, but the woman was placed in critical condition, and she apparently is still in the hospital. It looks like there was also another passenger. So a total of 3 people, 1 passed away, 2 injured, and were in the hospital. With that being said, it says the investigation is ongoing. Fortunately, the dump truck driver who was coming the opposite direction was uninjured, and so he's okay. So at this point, it looks like this falling tree set everything into motion, which caused this ripple effect and unfortunately resulted in someone dying. Where do we go here, Lori? I was going to say, the family or the estate of this, the person that passed away, or the passengers who are in critical condition, what can you do?
Yeah, and it's kind of it's referred in the insurance world as an act of God.
Yes.
Really,
especially since we don't really know where did this tree come from.
Right. So
I wish they gave us
a little bit more to look at there.
Yeah.
I think it's, if it literally was just a tree that maybe, I was thinking, because we've had all this rain.
Right.
So maybe, and
the ground gets wet and soft from what I understand, and those trees can just topple over.
Right. So if it's something like that, so again, there's not even an issue really with, a tree that maybe is in bad condition that somehow the landowner ignored, yes.
Well, let's break that down. Let's make that assumption. We'll start there. So let's say this tree did fall off of a property owner's premises, and they're driving by and it somehow falls onto their car.
Right.
If we're looking at that kind of a scenario, then is there liability?
There could
the property
be.
Owner?
There could be, but it would be, a tough case most likely.
Yes.
But
and that's interesting how you even get into proving the condition of the tree,
right,
and knowing whether or not it was poorly maintained.
Right. Yeah, I think that would be very, very, very difficult to.
Makes you want to go home and look at your trees.
Yes. No, the arborist comes by every 3 or 4 years and, to trim things up. But but I mean, it would have, that's why I said it would be a very, very difficult case. But I mean, suppose that, was an open field, but owned by somebody, and that there was actually some photographic evidence showing trees that were obviously on their last legs, so to speak,
aging
or whatever,
and rotting and things of that nature.
Right. But that's really what you'd have to have. You have to have something where somebody that had control of those trees should have, in the exercise of reasonable care, known that they should have been taken down or what have you.
Right.
Short of that, you're back to, it's just something that happened that's outside of anybody's control. And so sadly, I don't think that there would be any real recourse that I can think of there.
Yeah.
It's just, I think about I've had friends that have driven up to North Florida where, a deer runs into their vehicle, which can be a very serious accident. Very.
Not just for the deer.
Right, right. No,
and so serious damage to the vehicles and the persons in the car. Yeah.
All right. So, and with other vehicles, unless, now I guess the other driver was able to more or less avoid injury, and I can't recall now whether there was actual. Because I guess the truck that the tree fell on just slammed into the other ones, right?
Right.
Yeah,
so my understanding is the truck that had the tree fall on it was just a pickup truck of some kind. And because of the tree fell, I'm assuming maybe they tried to veer away from the falling tree. They went into oncoming traffic and then collided with the dump truck. Now,
arguably, again, depending on what the actual facts are, if the driver, obviously that would have been a shocking incident to have the tree come down on you, but but if there was some argument that could be made about whether or not he controlled the vehicle reasonably, other vehicles approaching, you are supposed to be aware that you got to be looking at all times. And you should be aware and plan defensive maneuvers, assuming that things could happen on the roadway.
Right.
But having said all of that, it's still, at least from the way it's recounted in this situation, seems more like a situation that is just a wild thing that occurred.
Yeah, it's just what you would call a freak accident, for sure.
But how many times, I mean, I can't even count how many times we get what I'm going to think are pretty wild calls. And you always, because there could be more facts, like we're just going off of the little bit that's there. So it could be that
there could be more to the story. That's for sure.
Right.
Let's break it down to the other scenario. Again, these are kind of hypotheticals. It's almost like law school questions. So exam questions. So let's say it's a lot, like you mentioned, where let's say it's owned by the city or a municipality of some kind. And there's that neighbor that reports everything, and there's overgrown trees, and it's they need to be trimmed, and you all need to come out and do something about this lot. There's falling trees, there's debris, it's overgrown, it's an eyesore, and it's been reported, and there was notice. There's public record. And the reason why I'm going down this avenue is because I've seen situations where there's these neighbors that are very much going to keep report and complain. And so there's record of, these kinds of complaints and notices to the city or the county. And in the event that this was that kind of a situation, and then that tree ends up falling onto a car, do you think there might be liability then against the municipality or the county or the lot owner, if you will, if there's notice?
If it's a kind of an operational thing that that they more or less ignored. Now, if they didn't, you'd have to have the notice, of course. And in that scenario, we're saying they have the notice. But I think in that scenario, if they had notice and failed to respond to that, I think there could be an argument. Actually, I have an interesting situation, even in my own location where I live. There's a sidewalk, which I've noticed because of what we do. And, a lot of sidewalks will have areas where they're uneven.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I've seen, and this sidewalk is no more than about 10 years old, I don't think, but maybe a little bit more, but not much. And I'd noticed maybe a year ago that they had, shaved it down in certain areas, but the area that seemed that it was the most elevated and had like a sewer cap in it and stuff, they hadn't done anything to that, which I thought was, odd. You're there, right? Well, now over the last, I'd say the last several days, they've come in and they've actually leveled that area where, and there was like, I would say easily an inch, maybe even 2-inch lip.
Yeah.
Now, we know as lawyers that obviously those kinds of things where people walk and jog, you could see it plain as day, and we would hear over and over again that
open and obvious.
Yeah, that's the person just wasn't paying enough attention. It's really their negligence of their own, their comparative negligence. But if there have been reports of falls, and I'm going to presume there must have been,
in order for them to come out and address that, it had to have been.
And it's so I thought, oh wow. So that would be this situation here. If something like that had been reported, and the municipality or landowner, either way, really had just completely ignored it. That's a different situation.
That's what I was thinking. But of course, we don't know if that would apply in this particular scenario. I want to take it in another direction. Same facts as far as the falling tree unfortunately on the pickup truck. Same scenario, but this time the tree was being transported on the back of another vehicle.
Okay.
And then the tree falls off of that vehicle onto the pickup truck. How does that change the scenario?
And we can't tell. That could even be what was happening there, since we don't really see trees.
Tree,
really falling. Exactly. That doesn't happen all that often, thank goodness. In that situation, then the person that was hauling the tree that came loose, certainly didn't have it secured very well.
Right.
And so I think that there would definitely be liability in that situation, because there that would almost be in the law. We have the old res ipsa loquitur, and
the thing speaks for itself.
It does. I mean, that shouldn't have been able to come off, if there hadn't been negligence in securing it.
Right. It kind of reminds me of this recent storm that passed by. I forget the name of it now. It just a few weeks ago.
Oh, I think Debbie or something like that.
Yes, yeah. Debbie. You're right, Debbie. And I remember venturing out and going to church that morning, and it probably shouldn't have. But it seemed calm. It hadn't really rained yet. And then I got around the corner and my road was blocked. And there was a tree that was down. I thought, oh my goodness, glad that didn't come down as I was driving under it. So
absolutely,
you definitely have to be safe, because as you see here, there could be very much of a difficult liability situation when it's just an act of God, as you said, where no one you can really point the finger at potentially when you just have these kinds of things that occur. But with that being said, going back to the last fact pattern, if it fell off of someone's vehicle and that person failed to secure it, there may be a claim against that person. But in that kind of a situation, you may not be able to identify the vehicle.
That's true. Yeah.
And so that brings us to our ever-present and constant conversation about uninsured motorist coverage and how and why that's so important to have that kind of coverage. Because in that situation, when you have debris or an item of some kind flying off the back of a vehicle, I have to admit that's one of my fears when I'm behind these big construction vehicles. They're carrying all kinds of pilings and crates and you name it. And it's like, oh my God, I hope that's secure.
Right.
As I'm driving behind it. And my first thought is, let me get from behind it. But things happen so fast. And the driver of that vehicle may not even have realized that they've lost something. And now that's caused you to swerve, you crash, you hit a pole.
And they're on down the road.
And they're gone.
Don't even know anything happened.
Don't even realize it happened. And what do you do then, Lori, when you can't even identify the person and the person may not even realize that they were even responsible?
Right. Well, you definitely call the police, make sure there's a police report, because you have a situation here that we would call a phantom vehicle, basically, because you were in a motor vehicle accident. The damages all flowed from that. And if you hopefully have uninsured motorist coverage, the coverage that we talk about every single time we have an opportunity to, because it's so poorly understood by people that are not insurance people or lawyers, basically, but if you have uninsured motorist coverage, then you would be able to bring a claim with appropriate proof. That's why it'd be very important to have the accident recorded and how it occurred.
Exactly right.
Yeah, so that you wouldn't get pushback from your insurance company. And then the normal pushback you get is an evaluation of the extent of damages. But at least your liability in that situation wouldn't necessarily be as big a hurdle.
Right, exactly right. And you made a good point when you said report it. Of course, calling the police and making sure things are getting documented. That's actually a question that a lot of clients ask, and they call and they're like, should I talk to the insurance company? Should I be speaking to my claims representatives before I talk to an attorney? And if so, what should I say and what shouldn't I say? And so how do you respond to a question like that?
Well, in any accident in which there's a potential that you are injured, and we have talked about this quite a bit often, we all hope that we aren't, but after the adrenaline wears off, a little time goes by, you may have issues. So if that's even a possibility in your situation, then it's fine to report your claim. But you don't need to get into any extensive discussion about it. You should hire an attorney, consult with an attorney, and then normally, the attorney can then be present with you when there's the insurance company will want to talk to you.
Exactly.
So there's nothing wrong with that, but you really don't have any idea of what the issues are. And so the insurance company is going to be very interested in minimizing anything that's going on with you in terms of injuries, et cetera. I mean, how many times have we seen cases where some of them actually even try to settle up with people for minimal amount of money at a time when the person is thinking that they don't really have a big issue. They certainly hope they don't.
Or they may just have one small urgent care bill and they think that, okay, they're being reasonable. They're offering to pay this bill for me and give me a little bit extra in case I need more treatment in the future. That seems fair, right?
And
usually it's not.
Yeah, usually it's not because they're not looking out for your interests. So in that scenario, that's a big red flag. And we see that when people come to us because they have more significant injuries than they initially thought, or they didn't even understand what they were being, what was happening. They didn't realize that they were actually signing off on their claim.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Or they may think that, oh, well, this is just for one portion of the claim, but if I have continuing medical or if I end up having wage loss, I can resubmit those later. No, unfortunately, they're going to get you to sign a release when they send the funds.
Yes.
And that release is going to be of your entire claim, not just a portion of the initial process or the medical, but not the wage loss or vice versa. It's the entire thing.
Right.
And so that's why it's always best to not have those discussions without representation and not really even get into the details of the extent of your injuries because you don't really know yet.
Like you don't really know. Yeah. I mean, that's so often the case. And, insurance companies, they're businesses, they're in business. So it's not their job and they are not looking out for your particular interests.
And so that brings up a good point and probably want to be my final question as we wind down. But of course, if you have a quick question you want to get it in before we leave, the number 727-441-3000. That's a good question, Lori. So how do people really appreciate or understand what their case is worth? Because if an adjuster calls you the day after the accident offering you $2,500, that might sound great.
Right.
How do you really understand what the case is worth?
And that's the exact point. Yeah. There's no way, including we as attorneys, are not going to know what the ultimate value of the case is because that really depends on what the extent of the injuries are. And it is impossible to know at that early stage unless you literally have no issues at all, but it isn't, it takes a little time to know that.
And I asked this question to Brian before, and he, says he's kind of had his style over the years, but how do you present, what should be calculated? And when you're talking about presenting the damages to a jury, like for things like pain and suffering and things like that, what do you feel is the best way to present those kinds of things? Because ultimately, your case is worth what a jury is going to give you.
Right. And so it's kind of a complicated conversation in a way because the ultimate value, there's no book that anybody can go to. Everything is with reference to what some theoretical jury might do. And of course, no one knows precisely, but particularly with auto accidents and injuries, there are a lot of patterns, a lot of things that are very similar. And so insurance companies definitely have opinions on settlement ranges. And we, with our experience, will have some opinions on, settlement ranges that we will compare to what it would take to get a better result in a trial setting. So we talk with clients about those things. But the point is, you don't take $2,500 right after you've had the accident. And no one should do that. I mean, you should give it a little time and you will always have plenty of time, and talk with an attorney I've had many conversations, I'm sure you have too, over the years where someone has an initial consult. They just want to reach out and learn what their options are. And they may decide they don't want to pursue a legal matter, and then that's your choice, but you need to have some information before you make that choice.
Exactly. Don't go it alone and uninformed. So that is, of course, always the theme. Get a consult, talk to an attorney, get informed, and then understand what your rights are and you decide how to proceed. But with that being said, we are at our time, Lori. It's always a pleasure co-hosting the show with you, folks. This has been FLA Law live on the radio, your live legal talk show. And of course, we are here every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Thank you for joining us. And we hope to hear you or see you back again next Tuesday at 5, calling in with your questions. And we'll see you next week.